We're now going to come to Ian Rippin. Now, I'm sure most of you will know who Ian is. He's the CEO of MCS. But Ian, tell us a little bit about what MCS is, what it does, what you want to do. I know you've got some new announcements, but just give us a general synopsis of what MCS is.
Yeah, sure. So MCS is 15 years old, would you believe? It used to be part of government and was spun out 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, the first chief exec of MCS, that's charity owned, is me. So MCS is essentially a standard setting organisation. We benefit from over 220 volunteers who volunteer their time to develop the standards. But we're also the quality assurance department. We like to think of ourselves as quality assurance for the sector, and that can include what is the right training, right the way through to delivering quality for customers. So the changes you referred to are now in the public domain. We've published our consultation on significant changes to MCS. Really hoping to hear from people what they make of those changes that we've proposed. We have been listening to installers and to consumers. So we think it's about right, but we need to know what you think, what you want your MCS to be over the next 5 years. What should MCS do?
Well, that's good, because normally I don't have an audience when I do my podcast. I do it on Zoom now. I used to be a peripatetic pop-up podcast. I used to go around with my microphones and interview people. Then obviously we had COVID, so I found out you could do it over Zoom. But as I've got an audience, then I might obviously see some engineers in here, so I might actually open up some questions to the audience. If you've got any questions for MCS, have a little think about them, because I might hand the microphone out in a bit. What do you think have been the main problems? Because as we know, there are people sometimes moaning about MCS. What do you think have been the main problems or issues people have been coming to you with?
People moaning about MCS?
They do, Ian, I'm afraid.
Okay. From an installer's perspective, I think it's really confusing, actually. You know, what are you required to do to be compliant with the standards? And I think over the last 15 years, an industry has grown up around the standards that doesn't always translate into great quality solutions for customers. So I think from the installer, we need many more installers in the sector. We need the best of the best to join us in fitting heat pumps and solar PV. But we know that the smaller installer looks at MCS and thinks, well, all this back office and paperwork, I've got to take this on. Does this actually amount to me doing a great job for my customers? Hence the consultation. I think from the customer's point of view, that it does go wrong sometimes. We have to face that. There are issues, certainly with customers who don't fully understand what they bought often. I mean, this is a minority, and I think the scheme needs to help customers understand how they choose the installer for them, the solution for them. And if things were to go wrong, they need to be supported and helped. And I think, again, around that, MCS has allowed a little industry to grow up that doesn't always mean that customers are protected. Now, that isn't to say that, you know, we know there are fantastic installers out there who really care. In fact, they're so passionate about what they do, that gives me energy. I love that. But then there are some who don't deliver for customers, and we need to respond to those quickly. So that's what the consultation is about, to really sharpen up MCS. It's 15 years old. It needs a review, and that's what we've triggered recently.
That's worth pointing out. There's some people, engineers that been doing the MCS, and they get on. Leah, you get on all right with it. There's probably some things you'd like to see changed, but Barry, you get on all right with it. Steve, who's going to be coming in,
hi Barry,
gets on all right with it. But what sort of things have you wanted to see with MCS while you've been involved in it?
Yeah, I totally agree with Ian that there is too much emphasis on being able to do the paperwork well and not enough on whether you really are delivering a quality install. The other thing that is kind of quite gutting as a small installer, you feel like the amount of oversight that you get as a small installer is actually relatively similar to the amount of oversight that's put onto a much larger installer who may well be delivering kind of hundreds and hundreds of heat pumps a month. And I think there are some things in this consultation that will help balance that out a bit. But that for us is really key. That there's a move in this consultation to more of a risk-based assessment. So rather than there just being a set schedule of you will be inspected every year, that it will be more about, have your installs generated complaints? Are you a newly qualified installer? Various other criteria that mean that actually if you're doing a good job, you're not going to have to go and constantly show someone that you're doing a good job. If you're not doing a good job, hopefully you're more likely to actually get picked up. So I think, that's a really good step in the right direction.
I just want to pick up on that assessing thing, just for anyone that doesn't know. So it's MCS, you don't actually do the assessing, it's a cert body that does the assessing.
That's correct,
And there's 7 of them, have I got
That's
that right?
correct,
So you've got Optech, APHC, NAPIT.
Yes, NICIC.
So one of my questions to you, obviously, as a trained assessor, I'm trained to assess assessors and IQA and all that stuff. Is there standardisation amongst assessors? So I talk to engineers and they'll say, Nathan, one year I've had this assessor, that they want this. Next year I've had this assessor, they want that. Next year, there doesn't seem to be standardisation, even though you're a standard setting body for the engineers, there doesn't seem to be this standardisation amongst, obviously you've got 7 cohorts of their assessors, but I don't even know they're standardising their assessors, let alone across the whole range. Is that a problem, or is that going to be something you can resolve?
It is a problem. Let's be honest. I think the way the current scheme works is that depends on your certification body and the consumer code that you choose to be a member of. That can affect how you are assessed against MCS. And so the consultation does involve a level of risk assessment. So if you're a fantastic installer and we never hear anything about you other than great things from customers, and we will be checking, then we don't want to see you. Just get on with your job and do great stuff. If you're an installer that has had problems and needs support, there are often installers who actually want to be assessed because they want to evidence they're doing a great job. In the consultation, we are talking about standardizing the things that you are assessed against. And importantly, we want to make that public, so that you should never be in the dark as an installer as to what you're going to be assessed against. So, of course, you might find things on site, and it needs to be on site and not in your office, in your premises, looking at paperwork. It needs to be what we refer to in the consultation as delivered quality. Can you evidence that you've delivered quality? If you can, that's fantastic, we'll move on. If you can't, then we need to look under the hood and have a look at why it is you're not doing a great job for customers. And I must emphasise, the vast majority of installers do a great job for their customers, but as Leah says, today's scheme means that it's a one-size-fits-all, frankly, and if you're an installer, large or small, you get the same level of attention from your certification body. That cannot be right. If you're doing a lot of installations across the nation and you're using lots of subcontractors and we're hearing about your installations not being to high quality, you should attract more assessment versus a smaller installer that's doing great things. I like to call them artisan installers who can problem solve, do fantastic installations for their customers. We need to celebrate them, and they need to see less of their certification body.
Well, we've got an artisan on my far right. Ken, you never went the MCS route. I mean, you work for a company now that's obviously strongly involved with MCS. I mean, is there a reason why you when you were a sole trader, for instance, why you didn't do it?
Back at the time, there was a lot of hoops and barriers to try and run and jump over, and I just found it. I hit a few brick walls in trying to gain MCS accreditation. For example, I've been working for Daikin for 4.5 years, but I still had to do a BPEC in a heat pump qualification, and at that time, a lot of the stuff that was being taught was years out of date, and so things like that. But now I'm obviously been working for companies. For me, I'm actually a man that likes being on the tools. I'm not very good at the paperwork side of things, and there's a lot of people like that are similar in the industry that are good at either paperwork and not very good on the tools and fitting pipes, or vice versa. So it's really hard to get that true ideal engineer that's good at both. That's where people like Vito Energy and Leah come in. That are trying to gain engineers that already have good quality at the forefront of what they do, but maybe in the old gas background, and trying to then transition them across to heat pumps.
Now, we were talking about this assessment process. How many times have you gone through this assessment process now?
We've been going, we've been going 5 years, but COVID hit, so we didn't. I reckon we probably had 3 annual assessments, and every one of them, the assessor who's come out has had a different bee in their bonnet about a different thing. So you do never quite know under the current setup exactly what is going to be, kind of almost like the obsession. One guy was absolutely fixated on Legionella, and that's all he was interested in. And and another time it was something else. So yeah, I really think it needs this change so that there is a clear list, that you know what you're delivering against, you know what a good install looks like, and you're able to actually make sure you do that. It's not rocket science, right? But maybe it is. I don't know.
I mean, it shouldn't be jelly moulded, but there needs to be standardisation, as well as there needs to be standardisation across the manufacturers of how we install a heat pump. One says you need legs, one says you need a concrete base, others are okay with just gravel. There's a lot of misinformation for the engineer, so they might be happy fitting one particular unit, and then they do that method on somebody else's unit, and they get penalised, as well as the inspectors will say, like Leah said about the Legionella, but then you might have a bit of paperwork that's out of place, and they focus on that, or you haven't got the right sticker in the right place, but your installation is absolutely spot on, apart from one sticker, but you'll get penalised for that.
Who has the authority over these 7 CBs, these certification bodies? It's you, yeah?
Yes.
So can you go and say to them, you're not doing your job properly, do it properly, or you're out? Have you got that? Is that MTS got that power?
So we are known as a scheme owner. We own the scheme. And that's the scheme, the certification scheme that sits around the standards. So how do you get assessed against the standards? And we have contracts, licenses with each certification body. So yes, we do own that relationship. Now, how many of those levers have we pulled to date? Not many. But I will tell you that through this process of leading up to the consultation, all of the certification bodies have been very supportive. They've challenged where we need challenge, and that's why we're consulting. We need to hear from everybody. So on the whole, they are saying, yeah, for the market today going forward, they need to adapt and change to assess so you get the same you get the same assessment irrespective of your choice of certification body. You get the same experience, and I hear too often, unfortunately, that you might get an assessor that's electrically biased and they're looking at cables, and there is this conversation to be had about assessors can't be all the time, they can't know everything. They just can't, in the same way an installer can't. So therefore, right now, this industry needs a more of a prescriptive approach. And installers need to know what they're being assessed against. That can only be fair. I do try and put myself in the shoes of installers, and I'd hate it if they spent all day having cups of tea and biscuits and looking at my paperwork. That doesn't mean I've delivered quality. In fact, there's far too many examples that we see where somebody's got great paperwork, controversially, and then they don't deliver quality. Controversially, I've said that the likes of Easy MCS, MCS Made Easy, those things exist because MCS isn't easy. I don't mean easy as in the standard is low. It's impenetrable sometimes, and I'm the chief exec, so it's my responsibility now to make the changes that this industry needs. Installers tell us they want a governing body, they want standards, and they want to keep the cowboys out. So we've got this balance now. We've got a real balance whereby we need to do that job more effectively. We know we do. Not policing, but encouraging people to be the best they can be, and then actually exiting some, and we do occasionally. But also celebrating great stuff. Because there's this carrot and stick. We need to celebrate that there are some fantastic installers out there. We know who they are. They do fabulous work, and we need to celebrate that, to raise the bar. That's how you raise standards. At the end of the day, that's all MCS is. We're about raising standards, and you need to do that through encouragement as well.
That engenders a really interesting question. Now, I'm no economist. I don't know nothing about markets. I'm an engineer. So as you and I know, MCS was originally set up by the government. It's then become a limited company sitting underneath a charity. So usually within a market, you have competition to engender arguably to engender better standards. So if there was other people to compete with what MCS are doing, would that make standards or drive that up? I mean, you're probably going to want to say no to that, but can anyone enter that space as a competitor to MCS?
There's already competition in terms of the certification bodies that can deliver your assessments. You might have relationships with them now based on where you're coming from, or as a new entrant, you can choose which certification body. I, of course, do not think there is a case...
You're the gateway to the bus scheme. The CBs aren't gateway to the bus scheme. You're the gateway to that bus. Can anyone come in and be that gatekeeper as well?
No, because there are standards. The industry standards, we're the custodian of the standards. I think by definition, having different variations on the standard is a mistake. So while I agree that competition can drive the performance of assessment, we do need a single standard in the UK. How many other industries have multiple standards? And that's my background, I didn't say. You know, my background is certification and standards. You know, not doesn't make me popular at dinner tables, but that is my background. And a standard is a standard. By definition, it's a single standard. So, you know, MCS has got to be careful with that, and we need to make the market attractive to certification bodies. And there are many more now knocking at the door wanting to deliver assessments against a standard. It's the industry standard. We don't set them, of course. The technical working groups do.
Do they have to do structured continuing professional development, these assessors within these CBs? Because, you know, I had an engineer friend of mine have an assessor come out quite recently. They looked at a buffer and they said, oh, that's got 2 flows and 2 returns. They said that cylinder's got 2 flows and 2 returns coming out of it. They didn't know what they were even looking at. So do these CBs have to have periodical continued professional development so that their standards are maintained?
Yes. Now, whether that is working effectively, I think that's a good example of it isn't working effectively. But MCS, the standards are, and the certification bodies are overseen by the UK Accreditation Service, UCAS. And we've been talking to UCAS about how they make sure that the certification bodies are doing everything they need to do. Key to that is their impartiality, the credibility and the technical knowledge of their assessors. So we are encouraging UCAS to assess the certification bodies themselves. So an installer gets assessed by a CB, certification body. The CBs get assessed by UCAS. And we are going to take an active role in that. And we haven't today, Nathan. So MCS will be sharing with UCAS what we think the CBs do that is great, and that some of them do some fantastic work, and the things that they can improve. So if they're sending out assessors that do not have the prerequisite qualifications, we will be sharing that with UCAS.
I mean, assessing's hard, but I mean, I wouldn't want to do it, and I'm a qualified assessor. What, Leah, you can say?
I was going to say, on the competition point, I think the interesting date is 2028, isn't it, when there's no more bus grant. And, I mean, Ian's a smart guy. You've got that date in mind, right?
You sure about the smart guy?
Because
yes.
that's when the competition really starts, as to are installers and are consumers going to be interested enough in MCS to continue with it?
And that is the question we face with solar at the end of the feed-in tariff. And I think, well, I'll go back to this. We did an independent survey of installers who didn't think they were answering questions to MCS. They spoke to a third-party research, and they all, vast majority said, yeah, of course the industry needs standards. Of course the industry needs a governing body, but we really don't like that MCS thing because that's too complicated and doesn't add up to delivered quality. That's where that phrase came from, delivered quality. So at the end of the feed-in tariff was roughly about the time I started work at MCS, so nearly 5 years ago. I can't believe where the time's gone. And everybody said, well, MCS is dead in solar. We've got more solar PV installers that are MCS certified, more MCS certified solar PV products than ever before. So we want installers. I mean, this might be fantasy at the moment, but as we go through these changes we want to make, we want installers to want to be MCS as a mark of quality and a differentiator. That's my ambition for it. Some won't want to be, and that's fine. But we do know, and we get hundreds of calls a week from customers going, I need to be reassured that the installer knows what they're doing and I can trust them and the product they've chosen is right for me. And thirdly, if something were to go wrong, in a minority of cases, somebody is going to help me and protect me. And that's what consumers ring and say to us. So that's you're right, 2028 for the heating industry, renewable heating industry is a watershed moment, and my ambition is that it's a moment where people go, do you know what, I want to stay MCS because I understand it, firstly, and it allows me to say to my customers, I've got a mark of quality.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And although solar smart export guarantee does drive you MCS,
it does to some extent, but I mean, we know. Let's hope that's going to change. The seg is very low. We're seeing some movement in that market, certainly linked to battery. But yeah, it's when I talk to those installers who are, some of which are very angry and want to talk to me about their experience, if I said to them, well, seg's the reason, I'd probably on the floor. So, you know, I would say that seg is helping, but you can be, as long as your energy provider is assured that you're following a quality regime, you don't have to be MCS, actually.
Going back to the heat pump quality thing, what about every heat pump manufacturer has publicised their SCOP and COP data from their customers, and then that gets either back to you or is open to the public, and so a person that's trying to pick an installer, Vito Energy, I mean, our average is about 4.2 on our installs at the moment.
Excellent, yeah.
That's a good starting place for a customer that wants to start that journey and having a heat pump and picking either a contractor or company. Why isn't that just general across the board?
So having it monitored, you mean?
Well, a lot of heat pumps have that built in now, and as the years go by, more and more are putting that into their controls and into their software. So as a service installer, if I go to a heat pump and I see it's got really bad efficiencies, then my alarm bells start ringing. If it's really good and I can see the system's really good, then happy days. If I can optimise it even more, great. But that's a good starting point. If I ring up Mr. and Mrs. Miggins and say, what's your SCOP for this year? And they say, oh, we only done 2.5. That's an instant alarm bell of what's wrong. You know, something wrong with that installation.
Couldn't agree more. In the product data, of course, there's the sort of on the lab conditions, what is achievable through a product, but that isn't enough. So in the new assessment, in the consultation, we want to see SCOP levels that have been promised delivered, so delivered quality. And we're really open to what that could be. I'd like to celebrate more of the achievement of fantastic SCOPs. But we do see, it's an indicator, isn't it, that something else is wrong, or many things are wrong with a system if it hasn't achieved its promised level of performance. And that's key to this new consultation. We're not looking to penalise installers, but we are looking to see that they deliver what they promise to their customers. And if they do, that's great. If they don't, that might indicate there's a design flaw, an install flaw, any other that you would understand that I wouldn't. Something wrong.
Well, that's exactly the point. It would then flag up on your system that installer is perhaps not doing what he's meant to be doing, or she, and then I know you're good. Anyway,
you worked for me for how many years, Ken?
Okay. But I know your systems are good anyway. But that should flag up, and alarm bells should ring, and then you come down with the thumb screws on that installer.
Come down with the thumb screws. Yeah,
I'm going to disagree with him now.
Okay, go.
I totally see where you're going, but there is a proviso to the SCOPs in that if you go into a customer's home, you are into their home and there is a lot of customer choice about how much work you do to that home.
Yes.
So if you're a customer-focused installer, you might quite often be saying, as an MCS installer, I need to make you really clear that if we do X to your house, your SCOP will only be around 3 maybe, because you don't want to upgrade all your radiators and you're choosing that maybe this pipe work doesn't necessarily get upgraded. So it isn't, SCOP isn't always what's the best thing to go on.
So the point is that the installer has delivered to the design that's been agreed and quoted to the customer. And if they fall below that, that's an issue. Not what it was. No. In a way, we don't really care. We want.
What's the minimum standard at the moment? 2.8 SPF, is it?
Yes. Yeah, 3.2, I think, on the bus.
So the electrification of the heat project picked up quite a lot that were under that then?
Yeah, now if under the new scheme, if you have, as Leah has described, if you've agreed that you're going to sacrifice some performance because you're not going to change the heat emitters or you're not going to do insulation or whatever it is, as long as you have said that clearly to your customer and under the new
But they've still got to get over 2.8, haven't they?
Well, the actual performance of the device itself needs to be capable of 2.8 plus on the bus, under the boiler upgrade scheme. When you then take the device and put it into a home that they say, well, I'm not going to do all those things, I just want a heat pump. I mean, there will be customers like that. I'm not saying the installers need to protect themselves. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm saying that you need to be clear with your customers what they're getting. They need to understand the choices that they face. And that's true of anything in life, isn't it? Hence why in the new scheme we've got the customer duty. It says what it is. It's a duty. Your duty is to sell the right solution. And if your customer says, well, I'm not going to do those things, I just want a heat pump and you can walk away from that. Or you can say, well, I could make that work, but you're going to sacrifice some performance. And that's putting the customer first, isn't it?
So what does a customer do now with the new scheme? Because obviously we've got the consumer codes, rec heights. In this new setup, if a customer has something what they feel is a bad install, what is the process they now go through? Who do they contact first? What happens? What's the chain?
First point of call is always the installer. I mean, that's the relationship that should be working for the customer. Now, if that isn't working for whatever reason, then it's MCS. Really clear, it's then MCS. Not, well, what's a consumer code anyway? Not my certification body, because that's not what they do. So it's MCS in the new scheme. But we will always, always involve the installer, especially if there's a dispute, because that might be just a misunderstanding. I mean, we have to trust that installers are doing, on the whole, do a great job. And usually, when we talk to them and say, we've had your customer on and they're not happy, they're usually mortified. It's the ones that aren't that then we worry, where they go, no, I've been and I've sorted it out, it's all fine. Well, your customer still isn't happy. And is it justifiable? So as the customer raising issues that are not justifiable, and we do see that too, and we want to be involved in those conversations and take the side of the installer. Is the system delivering as you promised? And we will go out and have a look at it with MCS people to prove. And that's the problem, Nathan, with the current scheme. When there are issues, there seems to be it's very slow for someone to go out and have a look at the problem that the customer's facing and then nipping it in the bud early. That's what we all need. And it might be the customer's just misunderstood or is having a go, trying to get some money back. I mean, we do know there are poor installers, a minority. There are also poor customers.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. I might open, if has anyone got a question they want to ask MTS? Sam, you want to ask that?
I feel like I'm firing squad.
Hi Ian, thanks so much for doing this. Yeah, sorry, my name's Sam. I'm an entrepreneur, I guess, startup, and I think it's great everything you've said about trying to improve the quality of installs and trying to create a process. I think the natural other side to that coin is with any kind of regulation you can impinge on or inadvertently prevent new technology. And I'm kind of curious how, as part of this new scheme, how you might address that, how you might make room for innovative products that may not fit your existing model. You know, other industries have done things like sandboxes and that sort of,
That. So, I mean, by definition, standards are a great route to market, but there also can be an inhibitor of new technology that doesn't meet the standards. So how do I get that in front of a market, in front of a customer? So, yeah, we are looking at the product scheme in the same way we're consulting now on the contractor scheme, the installer scheme. We will be later in the year or early next year looking at the product scheme as well. So that's where the manufacturers will get even more interested in what MCS is about. So can we create those sort of innovation pathways? I'm using all the wrong language, I know, but so yeah, understanding when something is, can it be MCS certified if it doesn't comply to a standard? Can you write a standard that talks about innovation and technology moving forward? And if your product meets those principles, you see the dilemma. So that's what we want to look at later in the year. So hold that thought. We'd love to hear from you then when we start to look at product and innovation.
My boss wants to ask a question.
Is this allowed?
Oh, it seems very dodgy.
Yeah.
One of the recurring themes we see when we have customers come to us that have had a bad installation is that... Closer. Really close. So one of the problems we find is that the customer comes to us and they've had a bad installation. We can try and rectify it a little bit. The person that fitted it in the first place is no longer operating. They've taken some money. They've disappeared. They reform within a week or two, and they have no barriers to joining MCS and therefore doing exactly the same thing again cyclically.
So under the current scheme, that should be checked by the consumer codes. The consumer codes should be assessing here's a director that's in common, that's Phoenixed the company or started a new company. Under this consultation, we will not mandate consumer codes membership, partly for that reason. We will also not mandate insurance-backed guarantees because they're worthless. What we want to do is create the MCS guarantee so that there is a fund for the industry, like an affinity insurance. I've got to be careful how I describe this because we haven't actually decided, but the proposal is there is a fund that we look after for the industry that in lean years pays out and needs money in good years doesn't require you to put any money in, but we'll step in and rectify issues for a customer using installers who we trust to do that work. So that's the best answer we can come to. But if you've got other ideas, please put that into the consultation. Please do. We will be assessing every contractor continually. And at the moment, when you join MCS, you get some checks by your consumer code, and that sort of is the end of it. With technology the way it is, we can see whether you're causing issues elsewhere in other industries. So we're going to machine learning, we're going to adopt all those types of technologies so that we can spot that Ian Rippin and Rippin Renewables, I've got 3 other businesses and it's a car crash and I should never be allowed back in the sector. So we're going to need your help. We're going to need installers say, he's come up again and he's disguised that he's caused problems before. So we will be formalising that to allow installers to whistle blow. That's important. We want you to feel like we're your governing body and proud to be part of it. I mean, that is aspirational, I know, where we are today, but that's the route we're taking.
Well, thank you. So we've actually got to wrap it up. Time's up. So it's gone quick, hasn't it? Always goes quick. Ian, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Personal note, probably if you've never heard of my podcast, I do have seasonal sponsors. MCS did sponsor my second season, so thank you very much for that. I wouldn't have been able to get it off the ground without sponsors. I better mention my latest sponsor is My Energy. My Energy are over there somewhere. I think my navigation in this place is rubbish. Oh, we're over that way then. My
It really is.
sponsored
It's over there.
the current season, so thank you to them. If you've never heard the podcast before, you can find it on all the podcast channel-y type things, Google, Apple, all that kind of thing. Thank you to my audience. Thank you to the questions. Definitely thank you to Leah. Leah and I are involved very much in training, so we'll probably be doing some talks and stuff about that over the next few months, telling you what we're doing. And thank you to Ken as always. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.